right, do you want to get us kicked off, Chris?
All right, welcome everybody. I'm Chris Russell, I'll be your moderator for today. And our topic is AI compliance for 2026. Things TA leaders need to know headed into next year. Our guests today are Bennett Sung, formerly of Fair Now, and Martin Redstone from Eunomia HR. As always, Leah Daniels is here, our host. Alex Murphy should be joining us. And Bennett and Martin, let's start with you guys. Say a few words about what your background is in this area. And Martin, why don't you go first?
Yeah, sure. Thanks for having me on today, and thanks for inviting me on. So, Martin Redstone. For those that don't know me, I've been in the recruitment and TA space for the last 20 years. For the last 15 of that, it's been technology and innovation. But 9 years ago, jumped headfirst, or almost 10 years ago now, actually jumped headfirst into the world of chatbots and conversational AI. And 7 years ago, started up the probably one of the first AI advisory consultancies in the industry. And I've been doing that ever since. So working with internal TA teams, HR teams, and external agency recruiters on how they can implement AI effectively, but also responsibly. And that's what the last 12 months for me has been looking like. More work around AI governance, risk management, and compliance to ensure AI is implemented ethically and responsibly.
All right. Bennett, why don't you go next?
Hello, everyone. My name is Bennett. I'm a very similar background to Martin. I think we've crossed paths multiple times, maybe in the States and over the pond. But really, kind of my 20-year background has been facilitated working with leading HR and TA tech providers, and really kind of help becoming their subject matter experts in the space and around thought leadership. So certainly been working with some various brands across the board, from my early days at Virtual Edge that became ADP to working with Humanly. And then most recently, I've been spending the past year at Fair Now, which is an AI governance platform, really kind of intersecting a lot of the work I've been doing on AI adoption with the new genre of AI governance.
I have done my own, but I didn't take into account. Hey, everyone, just to let you know, you're coming on with your mic's hot, potentially your camera's hot. So if you would like to participate, please unmute yourself. But if you are just listening, let's make sure we're all muted. Thank you.
Leah?
All right. Well,
All right, Leah,
welcome, everybody. Thanks for joining us today. My name is Leah Daniels. I lead our commercial business here at JobSync. JobSync, we do a bunch of things to help with the recruiter and the candidate experience. In particular, we offer career sites that wrap around your ATS so that your candidates actually have a seamless application experience, and then we take that further out into the market. So very excited to be here today. A few things I just mentioned: your cameras are hot, your mics are hot. Please feel free to participate in the conversation. So if you have questions or you want to jump in and add color, please feel free to do that. We usually have a second conversation going on in the chat, so please also feel free to jump into the chat and offer commentary, ideas, thoughts, questions. We will monitor that at the same time. So today's topic, which I'm pretty excited about, is compliance and AI, and really that intersection of the two. And where does that all kind of work around governance, around bringing that to market for our talent teams in particular, right? So we all know talent people are not always the biggest fans of compliance. This is a nice way to say that. It's not usually their first top of mind, but it's becoming more and more important as they are introduced to more and more tools, more and more opportunities, and more ways for us to get ourselves in trouble. So I'm super excited to have this conversation today. I want to start out with kind of the big question, which is, we have to deal with this. You don't have a choice. You don't get to put your head in the sand. So Martin, I'm going to tag you first. As an organization, as you walk into this, because you're, or really race headfirst into it, where do we start? What is the first thing we need to think about as we are adopting AI, and how do we keep governance and compliance as part of that conversation and implementation?
Yeah, so thanks. Great question. We are absolutely sprinting into this head first. And actually, where I'm doing a lot of my work now is working with organizations who are trying to retrospectively put governance in place, because they've been part of the AI hype. They've tried to do as much as possible, as quick as possible. Some of it's working, some of it's failing. Then they've realized they've got themselves into a bit of a tricky situation, especially post Workday Mobley kind of becoming a thing. So look, for me, I'm working with my clients on a specific framework. The first one is inventory. Work out exactly what you've already got in place when it comes to AI vendors, when it comes to models, but also, and this is the tough one, when it comes to your shadow use of AI. You need to ask people anonymously if they are using AI outside of any mandated policy. But actually, that's the next part of the framework is policy. So you need to have the inventory, but then you do need to lay down policy, AI acceptable use policy. And in our world, there's things like candidate use of AI policy and all those kind of things as well. So inventory, policy, and then provision. So if you are expecting people to use AI in their tasks, in their daily activity, but also in the processes, you need to make sure it's provisioned well. So you need to make sure you have good procurement, good infosec, good security process, et cetera, around that. And then finally, and probably one of the most important things, education. You need to make sure that you are upskilling your teams when it comes to AI literacy. And AI literacy isn't just how do you prompt ChatGPT, it's how do you understand the basics of AI, discriminative versus generative AI? Do you understand data accuracy, garbage in, garbage out, all of those kind of things. And yes, absolutely, can you prompt an AI tool? But more importantly, can you critically assess the output of that tool as well? So that's kind of the quick start governance framework that I work with my clients on: inventory, policy, provision, and education.
Do you think that as we progress forward in the next couple of years, we're going to do more and more analysis and really maybe testing of our own employees and their ability to critically think through what they're being told? Because this seems to me to be the biggest opportunity for failure is well, it's on the internet, it must be true. Well, ChatGPT told me it must be true.
Yeah, absolutely. I've got a funny story about that, but I don't think we've got time for it. So if anyone wants to hear that, then let me know. But basically, yeah, a lot of organizations now are thinking about how do we do two things. First of all, from our perspective, from a TA perspective, how do we assess candidates for AI literacy and AI readiness? In terms of bringing people in who can provide an ROI on the AI investments we've already had, but also internally, how do we look at our talent layer and look at the AI readiness across that? How do we then uncover L&D opportunities to upskill and reskill our staff in this kind of new world of AI? So actually, without this being a bit of a pitch fest, I have built a piece of technology that helps organizations do that called GenAssess. And I'm currently working with some large organizations in helping them understand how to assess AI readiness in their talent.
Amazing. Bennett, sometimes compliance comes second to bias, right? As we know, a lot of companies tend to gravitate towards this fear of bias before the fear of compliance. It's an interesting phenomenon we could probably spend hours on.
Yes.
Can you talk through sort of what why you tend to see companies look at that bias component first, and then what does that mean as they start to evaluate their own business and processes and the evidence, the inventory, et cetera?
I think from my point of view, my experience is that bias is tangible. In context is that there's been very explicit articulation in regulations about doing bias audits. Before the New York City Law 144, I don't think there were many folks looking that they were investing in AI, whether it was machine learning, natural language processing, or even automation. Nobody was really doing, quote unquote, getting those evaluated for bias and such. I think it's very different than, let's say, in the world of traditional manual human-driven assessments, which kind of mirrors itself in the world of AI. But I think what's beginning to happen is, interestingly enough, one of the first questions that companies need to ask themselves is, as Martin pointed out about inventorying, or in the world of AI, it's AI registry. The reality is, what kind of AI models or systems do I have? Literally, I've been asking this question for the past 12 months, and I get literally the biggest blank stare back. In the context is that nobody actually knows how many models they have. Yet, what they do realize and they do believe in is that they want to adopt AI, but they also realize that there's risk with AI. And so the notion that there's risk with AI, yet they don't know what AI systems they currently are managing in-house, kind of contradicts each other. So thus the importance of really capturing, first step, capturing and taking it in a simple Excel spreadsheet. Here are all my AI models, whether or not you develop them or you purchase them, right? I think that is the biggest interesting context in the world of HR and TA. Most of your AI is being purchased through other systems, right? And such.
That's an important point, right? It's being purchased through other systems, or it's being embedded in systems you already have.
Exactly, right?
Right.
So in both contexts, those are actually your responsibility as a deployer, right? Now, there's a whole world of AI responsibility and accountability for developers of AI systems. And that is, which could be it could be someone who actually is deploying it, but most organizations, unless you're very large, are actually building their own AI systems. Most of everybody is on the other side and thus acquiring AI systems. And it's just not that AI system. You have to realize that there is a supply chain with AI. So it's just not knowing, okay, let me learn about the AI models. What does that AI model do? What is it used for? Who is it used for, et cetera. But I need to know, they may tell you, well, we also lease a part of that model from somebody else. So there is a snowball effect of AI systems built within AI systems built with AI systems. And under this bigger governance umbrella overall, technically you're accountable for all of it. Mm-hmm. So that's the tricky part, right? Is figuring out the supply chain around AI models and where they come from and where's the origin and the true root and source of that model that could be influencing models that are being built upon it. So, but at the end of the day, what we're also starting to see as a trend in AI regulations specifically is that the AI regulations are, NYC came out, what you have to do bias audits. Well, now we start to see other regulations coming out from Colorado and from some of the newer ones out of California. They want you to actually keep track and do a registry and inventorying of your AI system. So that's just not a governance practice. It's now becoming a regulation practice. And within that, there are, we just saw from California and their recent law from their Fair Employment and Housing Act is that they said, well, you also have to retain the inputs and the outputs of your AI data for 4 years. So you have to then go back and ask the question to the vendor, how are you going to help me extract that data, or how are you retaining my data in that capacity? So there are some complexities being layered on that are going to throw companies for a loop, which is why at the end of the day, what we're starting to see is there's this great intention for regulation. Nobody has really thought through it in a lot of detail. So what we've seen, for example, how many times has the EU AI Act threatened to delay it? Well, we saw Colorado already delay it twice. So they have moved. They are now, it used to be that your requirement for Colorado AI Act, which is pretty much a mirror of the EU AI Act, that now goes into effect. It was going to be February. We've got a grace period now to June of next year. So sometimes the fragmentation and just the constant fluctuation is a challenge just to keep on top of itself. So.
And it gets worse, right? If you're a global organization, right? Mm-hmm. So Martin, I know part of the pre-conversation we were having was, what do you do as a company when you have operating facilities everywhere and anywhere, right? Just managing the US is its own hot mess. Right? Managing Europe by itself is a mess. Now add in both. Now add in Asia, and things get really complicated. So, how should companies start thinking about this from a global perspective?
Yeah, and real challenge that we come across on a very, very regular basis now. I'm very, very lucky. Obviously, as you can tell by my accent, I'm not from the US. I'm from the UK. Although officially the UK isn't part of Europe, we're kind of still hanging on to the edges of it. So we've got the EU AI Act over here, and that's been enacted since August last year. But actually, the parts that are more important for us, the high risk employment elements, come into effect in August next year. And that's given us a lot of time to work out exactly what we need to do from the EU AI Act perspective. But actually, one of the things that we have noticed across regulation that's coming out all over the world is that most of it is based on best working practice that's come out of the EU AI Act. Whether that be auditing, whether that be model inventory management, whether that be good documentation, whether that be transparency, explainability, etc. It's all pretty much based on the EU. And we tend to see this with a lot of regulation. We saw it with GDPR as well. That was kind of the first major data protection regulation that came out in the last 10 years. And so everybody else tended to copy that afterwards. It's called the Brussels effect. And so that's what we're seeing. So my advice when I'm working with companies that are multi-jurisdiction, international companies, is always plan for the most draconian legislation and regulation. And in our case, that's the EU AI Act. So if you use that as your best working practice and make sure you're compliant to that everywhere in the world, you're going to be covered for that regulation that's currently being enacted and in process, and any potential future regulation as well.
I think one of the challenges for the US companies is that individual states will try to take their own spin on usually the EU acts. And the states in particular and cities, as we know, New York City, have their own flavor. And so, yeah, I see Bennett making all the faces. And I see in the chat talking about as it's decentralized, like, do we even need an AI team? On the other half of it, it's almost like, do we need to embed an AI and legal team into some of our departments in our businesses? What's your perspective on this? Do we actually need a specialist that we embed into our talent, or at least HR teams, that just focused on the AI regulation, compliance, bias monitoring, tool adoption, what's being embedded, all the fun things that come along with this?
Yeah. So what I'm seeing is, definitely in central government departments, in large enterprise businesses, for sure at the minute, and also kind of trickling down into the mid-market, is this centralization of AI governance and AI ethics. And what we're seeing is usually it sits under Chief Information Officer. And we're seeing kind of a head of AI governance, or an AI governance project manager, or something like that. And so their role is to sit across the organization. A lot of organizations in the last kind of couple of years have set up AI steering committees and those kind of things, because obviously the whole world has gone AI crazy. So they want to kind of try and centralize it, process, procurement, etc. But now in this kind of new world of legislation and regulation, we're now starting to see that centralized AI governance team, or at least person, who is sitting under the Chief Information Officer. And just to kind of answer the questions that are coming on the chat around this, is that absolutely policy helps control that kind of shadow AI issue. And ultimately, it's kind of harping back to the early days of LinkedIn, where it's like, well, who's using their own personal LinkedIn? What does that mean for us? Data ownership, etc. That's exactly what that AI governance team and the CIO are working through at the minute. Is how do we manage this? How do we process it? How do we take advantage of people wanting to use their own tools? How do we mandate, things securely, confidential information, GDPR, all those kind of things? It's a real mess. But that's why we're seeing some of the larger organizations starting to really centralize this into something that can be rolled out across the organization.
It's a really good question, right? The bring your own device policy has been a challenge for companies for years. Now we're at bring your own AI, and how many have an AI sitting here next to them right now that you can chit chat with her and have a whole conversation and answer your
Yeah.
questions, right? And how do you control your inputs and your outputs, right? And for your compliance later, right? This
Yeah.
starts to get really, really messy really fast. Do you think,
Yeah.
Martin, based on that, the with the CIO kind of running the show on these things, we find companies slowing to almost a halt in their adoption, or do you think we're moving forward because we have no choice?
So, great couple of questions. There was a Microsoft LinkedIn work trends report that came out last year that highlighted about 75% of white collar workers are now bringing their own AI into the workplace. So it is a significant issue. And the way that organizations have started to control that is policy, provision, and education. If you want people to use AI, provide it. If you give it to them, they're not going to use their own one because you're giving them a tool to use that's secure and mandated and what have you. However, yeah, so sorry, what was the second part of that question, Leah? Forgot.
Bring your own device. How do you will that lead to people or the CIO slowing the adoption of
Yes.
AI down, or is it going to accelerate because it has no choice?
So look, this is the issue with governance, is that a lot of people see it purely as a bureaucracy process that's going to slow everything down. And actually, I have an analogy around putting in good governance, around kind of guardrails. So think about a highway, for my American friends, not a motorway, a highway. We have kind of metal barriers in the middle of the
It's
highway.
a motorway.
Exactly. What is a motorway? It's not a highway. Metal barriers down the middle of a highway, usually close to the fast lane. They're not there to slow the traffic down. They're there to ensure that people can drive quicker, safely. And that's exactly the same point as having guardrails in place in your organization around good AI governance, is so that people actually know what they can do so they can move forward at pace. So that's kind of where I come from when it comes to good guardrails and good governance, is they're there to actually make sure that people can move quickly but safely at the same time. So no, I see good governance as a way of speeding up innovation so that people know what they can do, what they can't do, what vendors they can go to, etc., etc. Because if they don't, they might start slowing down, not sure what they can do from a policy, legal, correct, responsible, ethical perspective.
I'm going to shift a little bit. Bennett, one of the things that I know you're particularly passionate about is this intersection of AI bias and how the ADA comes into this conversation around how the ADA, complying with the ADA along with still accelerating your business using AI. And how do you manage and monitor all of that? When you think about companies adopting things like AI interviews, how does this play in a world where you do still have certain regulations that are unrelated to AI, have nothing to do with AI. They've just been there all along that you also need to comply with.
So I think that's so the root of a lot of these regulations come from they're either being born out of an existing regulation, like ADA has talked about discrimination, accommodations, and so what applied historically still applies in today's new world of AI. So we're starting to see kind of that manifest itself. There's actually a lawsuit between Intuit and a prominent AI video interviewing provider that talks about accommodations. They didn't accommodate for this individual to be able to do the interview in a way that works for this and that for them. So accommodations is that, while it may be a legacy kind of regulation, it's brought into the current state of where we are today. So because the other, if they're not going to be derivative of that, they're going to be spun off into a brand new regulation. So if we just take it California as an example, right? They've been very active in the AI regulation space. So their Fair Employment and Housing Act created their version of a law that existed already, that just adopted to the AI ecosystem. At the same time, Governor Newsom and kind of the government state of California were trying to pass a brand new law that was actually almost a near duplicative of the Fair Employment Housing Act. So we're starting to see, this is kind of where regulations become very fragmented, become challenging just to keep on top of. If there's one thing you take away is figuring out like how do you help yourself, what are the resources for you to keep on top of the changing regulations, whether it's the time frame, whether it's the new laws coming into place. Because in 2018, we only had one AI regulation. Today, we have almost 30 plus regulations controlling the world in terms of their respective natures and kind of points of view for HR. So again, just because it's, again, a lot of the laws that are coming that are either being born out of something brand new, or you just have to look at things from the EEOC, the ADA, and they're going to adopt their existing points of view and apply them to AI. But they'll come out with very specific requirements. So this whole FEHA, California FEHA Employment Housing Act stipulates you have to, bias testing is optional, but you have to provide accommodations. You have to also retain your inputs and outputs from your automated decision-making tools for 4 years. They've provided a little bit more detail and framework around what's needed.
One of the
but keep in mind, there are a number of states that have, a lot of existing laws, right? I mean, so they're also like Illinois has a video interviewing law. Maine has a chatbot law now. There are some states that have very specific use cases for AI and how it's needing to be governed and managed. So it's sometimes very broad, sometimes very specific.
I think Illinois had one of the very first on AI interview, right? From back in the day, like 2018.
Back in the day, yeah, for sure.
One of the growing concerns around AI screening tools, grading tools, however you want to classify these, are that you have people who choose to opt out, right? So they opt out, and so they are not participating in it. Do they actually get a fair shot, or do we see bias then creeping in to that, where those people who choose to opt out of the AI screening, choose to opt out of being part of the AI process, are not actually treated fairly? Second part of that is, at the same time, we talk a lot about the human in the loop. Want to keep the human in the loop. Is the human in the loop actually becoming more challenging than it's worth, or is that still an important part of the process? Who wants to take that monster of a question?
I mean, I'll give it a go.
Can I add to that question? Can I add to that question, Leah? Okay.
Yes.
I have a question, and this is I'm gonna mute right after I ask it because I have a vested interest in this. But most organizations who are getting a lot of applications, 15% of those are actually getting reviewed. So you've got 85% who are not being reviewed, right? And then you have the people who, so then you implement an AI interview tool to give everyone the opportunity to interview. And then you have people saying, no, I want to speak to a human. But guess what? Last week, before you implemented, 85% of the humans didn't get to speak to a human, So I love Leah's question, and I'm curious how that's going to play out, because it's like, well, now we're giving you the right to talk and to tell your story, and you're opting out. So what does that mean for liability, right? When for years they've gone ignored, but now they want to talk to a human. Are people obligated then because we gave them the opportunity? So great question, Leah.
Martin, that question just got harder. Jump in.
It's give me a minute to think about it. So thanks, Jeremy. So look, when we look at these kind of changes to service ultimately that you're providing to people, if you think over to customer service, contact centers, they have implemented conversational AI automation quite significantly in such large organizations, and yet we still for the first kind of small percentage of that transformation, you end up seeing people who just smash away at the keys and type in, I want to speak to a human, for no reason whatsoever. They're just anti-technology. But actually, when we see the best transformations that have the greatest adoption, is when we think about designing the service and designing the experience around the sad path, as it were, the people that don't want to do this. So we start with things like cooperative principle, where actually we We design an AI chatbot, what have you, to actually tell people what they're there for, what they can help with, what they can't help with, and set up people's expectations. So we think about good design of experiences to start with as well, to help with that adoption. So that's the first thing. But the second thing is actually, again, a governance situation, which is actually creating something that I call kind of the cookie policy for recruitment, which is setting up, again, from a transparency perspective, a place where you can tell candidates exactly what technology and what AI you're using within your process. And that again helps. So with Jeremy's kind of point, which is if we set up a piece on the career page that says, or as part of the application process that says, we're going to give you the opportunity to engage with an AI system. Here's what that AI system does. Here's what it doesn't do. Here's how it uses your data, etc., etc. But we're doing it because we want to give you a better service. That's really key. Is actually telling them we're not doing it to help us as recruiters. We're not doing it because we get thousands of applications and we can't deal with it. We're doing it to provide a better service to you. Because we know that before we implemented this, we weren't able to speak to 85% of you. And that's a terrible, terrible situation for you and an experience for you. So we want to improve things by doing X, Y, and Z. Please give it a chance. Please go through it. And we'd love to hear your feedback afterwards as to how you got on. Ultimately, you have to think about how you're setting this up for success, both from the experience perspective and the process perspective, but how you can be transparent and give people the opportunity to cooperate with that from the very start. Those are my thoughts on it.
I will say that of some of the technology providers and those that are out there today, Greenhouse has done an exceptional job at communicating their usage for their own purposes of recruiting, not just for the customers, of how they use AI across their hiring funnel. And they have very explicit language and talks about here are the different areas for which we've adopted AI. Here's what's a purpose. So I feel for those that are trying to now then say, if there's an alternative to this AI interview, and that is to be able to talk to a human, that's where in this language on their dedicated AI page that they would actually articulate, here are the alternative ways you can engage with us if this does not work out for you. But the reality is, from an accommodations perspective, just like we saw in the early days of websites where, not every website was accessible. Well, that wasn't an excuse for why companies could not turn away customers. They had to find ways of being able to figure out how to work with them. And that's where it's going to come down to when it comes to accommodations, that you have to start planning what are the other ways that they could still get through the hiring process, even if they didn't use AI.
Where does this transparency belong? Is this on your career site? Is
Yes.
it on your job description? Is it on the application? Is it on all three?
I mean, what I've seen is I've seen most of it on a career center explaining how they use AI. So they talk about their hiring process. I've seen a lot of that. But it would be hurtful to have it trickle down, because people are going to forget. They may not have seen it on the careers page, but if they come right to the job description, they'll see it right there. So it's good to be a bit repetitive in this situation for starting, until people get familiar with all the different areas of information, because I think that is also the fragmentation of information that candidates can get from your career center. You don't want them jumping all over the place. The reality is that they're here to do one thing. They want to apply for that one specific job. So put as much of the information in the rec.
Yeah, I'd agree. Keep it central, link to it everywhere. And if they want it, and give them the opportunity to be able to find it. Absolutely.
We have a question from the chat I wanted to ask, which is, Bennett and Martin, what do you use to stay up to date with all these new laws and challenges and stuff there?
Yeah, so for myself, there's a couple, I'll put in some resources or forward on some resources that I turn to. So there's actually an AI governance newsletter by an individual. Her name is Louisa. Her last name is very hard to pronounce, but she is one that I get a ton of information from. I still turn to my former company, Fair Now. They still keep up to date. Probably the best AI regulations page out there in the market space. Is tremendously valuable about because they not only tell you what's in effect, they also tell you what's coming up. So let's cross our fingers that they continue to maintain that kind of transparency of regulations, because that is, you won't find that from a lot of other AI governance providers out there right now. And then I'll try to figure out how to mirror that a bit without copying it.
Yeah. So I'd agree. Bennett's former employer is a great resource for keeping up to date on regulation. I also have a Gemini process that goes on with a bit of automation that does kind of daily kind of searches of news and what have you. But I also subscribe to a couple of newsletters. One of them is Techie Ray. I think it's like Techie Ray. That's Substack, something like that. I'll put the link in the comment in the chat anyway. But that's a great place to find updates on regulation as well.
Awesome.
We start thinking about candidate consent in all of this, right? So we've now informed them. So we're going to do this. But in some cases, we're actually looking for more than that. We are looking for consent. What does best in class consent look like? Is it a checkbox? Is it already filled out? Is it a link off? How are we seeing it play out in the market right now? Are we seeing it play out in the market right now?
I mean, the rules are pretty broad and generic and probably ambiguous at best. I would probably take basic consent adoption in general, whether it's a checkbox with a little like phrase about here's what you're going to consent to. I mean, it can get that granular, or just say, hey, I approve it here. I'm just displaying it on my, for example, a lot of places that will gather consent is through chatbots. It's a very common area to gather this information. So I know a lot of, for example, the California Privacy Protection Law, really kind of monitors a lot of that. So I feel there isn't really a this is the problem. This is the challenge in governance right now. There isn't really a overarching standard. There are a lot of fragmented best practice. I hate to use the word best practice, but there's fragmented practices that we can reference to for consent. So, unless you're in the state of California, there's California privacy protection law is very specific, but in other places that say that you have to provide disclosure, that's a little bit more, kind of it's up for interpretation of how you execute on that.
Yeah. And over here we've got GDPR, obviously, and that's still that's been around since 2018. It's all about general data protection regulation, but it absolutely applies when it comes to AI as well. And I think again the principles of that are fairly good practice for that. So in a recruitment environment, you can say that somebody has legitimate interest. So they don't have to tick a box to say I consent to you holding my data. But you have to make sure that you are make sure that data is relevant, that you're only processing the data that you need to process, that you've got people the option to delete their data or ask for a request on how their data is being used, all those kind of things. But ultimately, it goes along with that piece of transparency, that AI kind of cookie policy, as I call it, which is ultimately laying out in there exactly, again, if you're processing somebody through an AI system, here's the data we're collecting, here's what we're using it for, here's the data that's being processed, etc., etc. Make it clear, make it transparent, and give people the opportunity, as we said earlier, to opt out. You don't need to ask people for consent because they're applying for a job, they've got that in front of them, it's legitimate, but give them the opportunity to opt out if they need to.
I think the other challenge, just to speak to the consent, is who's accountable for that information, right? I think there is, if it's coming through a career center, there's so many different sources where consent can be inserted into. So I think that is, is there something that, your AI providers are going to be able to, inject into their workflow? Is it something that you have to build into your career center? Outside of, the standard workflows already built in. So I think the challenge is then trying to figure out who is the source of that information and who and how is it going to be controlled and documented and audited.
behind that regulation and that consent, we then have the next layer, right? Which is automated decision making, which is the fear, right? Of all of the things in talent, this is the fear that the AI is going to screen me out, which we all know has been happening for the last 20 years with all ATSs ever, as evidenced by Reddit. But in all in all seriousness, right? This is the candidate fear. The candidate fear is the AI is screening me out. We hear it all the time, even when it's 100% not true. And you're like, that ATS was built in 1985 with crayons. They didn't know what AI was. You don't have to worry about it. They still worry about it. But here we are. And now we're at a place where it is possible and even practical and potentially even being used today to make decisions, right? What should companies be thinking about as they venture into this set of, let's call it shark infested water, where we are now going to introduce or potentially introduce the thing that everyone has always been afraid of?
Yeah. So, so firstly, I go back to my transparency piece. So as long as you're actually making people aware of what or what isn't happening, that's a good place to start. But again, it's great that we can look towards Europe and the UK actually in particular on this, because we recently in the UK had a new piece of regulation called the Data Use and Access Regulation. And what that did is it kind of was an addition to GDPR, because there are regulation within GDPR around automated decision making and automated decision execution. There's a difference between the two, which is quite important. However, the data use and access kind of got rid of a lot of the stickiness around implementing automated decision making, but provided some very, very interesting process around what this means. So first of all, is it a significant decision? They class hiring as a significant decision. So yeah, it is. So you need to give people the option of appealing the decision, giving their side of the story, asking for a human to review the automated decision as well. So those are three things. But actually, the most interesting bit was the option of giving a human, the option of asking for a human to review it. It specifically says if it is a significant decision, which hiring is, then it needs to be a person of reasonable seniority. So it's not like you can ask a junior, brand new recruiter to review this. It has to be somebody who ultimately is experienced and senior enough to be able to review that decision. So not just kind of human in the loop, but actually kind of expert in the loop ultimately.
Is this Pandora's box? Like, is this essentially Pandora's box, right? So we add AI to help us automated decisioning. So anyone and everyone can then appeal. It now needs to go to a more senior person than it was ever going to go to before. To Jeremy's point, right? Before a junior level person looked at them, if they got looked at all. Now we added this, let's make your life better, but our life better too option. And now we actually have changed the dynamic internally in our business, where we now have to bring in an even more senior level person to then reevaluate. Is this just Pandora's box if we go down this road?
Or is it really what it should always have been?
Yeah.
Right?
I was just about to say,
Right? For me, it's what it should have. This is what the experience should have always been. Like, if there should always, but I think there is a lot of I'm not sure if it's fear. Sometimes it's just simply your regulatory challenges of getting things through organizations, of just not feeling comfortable telling somebody why they were not, especially the rejection part, right? The rejection one is the one that obviously everybody is going to be keenly interested in, why they were not rejected. But it's a legacy practice already that, we're going to be very generic of how we explain why you were not selected. There are risks around making that explanation. We should find ways of opening that up. I think the other interesting dynamic about this automated decision-making systems that are in play, make sure that you have your configurations in these systems set up properly, right? I think there was if you have automatic dispositioning in your system from, because I just heard from another friend of mine who literally said within an hour they got a rejection over the weekend. I said, and they said, did anybody really look at this? I said, it's probably AI making that decision, but they forgot to turn off the automated notification. So thinking about what is the end-to-end experience? So if there is automated decision-making happening, do you really want that immediate notification to be sent out to the candidate.
Yeah, wait
Because it does
24
start to
hours.
plant, it does start to plant some doubt as to whether somebody really looked at their resume. So for me, it feels a little bit of, hey, it's always been like we should rethink how we communicate feedback to candidates and do it in a way that's good for business and good for the candidate. And then also look at what is your configuration of your system set up to be, so that there is either a delay in communication or there has to be that human triggered notification. So that's just another way of trying to get the human back into the loop instead of it being fully automated end to end.
Yeah, and actually, and they're great points, but the other thing that I was thinking is that, look, one of the other bigger conversation outside of governance and compliance is the future of the role of a recruiter, and we talk about this all the time. We talk about, will AI replace me, etc., etc. And look, I've always said that we're going to move to a point where AI is automating a lot of what we do. A lot of the stuff, like we said, we can't get through 85% of the applications. So let AI do it. Our role is going to be to not only do the kind of business partnering, lovely relationship stuff, but also to manage the AI systems. And part of that is going to be being that human reviewer of the AI decision. So if we don't want to start doing that, then we are actually putting ourselves out of future jobs, because our future job will absolutely be managing AI systems. And part of that responsibility will be being the human appeals manager or review manager or whatever you want to call it, that human in the loop, that expert in the loop, to ensure that AI is doing its job properly. So that, I see this not as a burden, not in terms of opening Pandora's box, but actually a natural evolution of our roles.
This is the critical thinking that we started this conversation on, right? Are you able to critically think through what you're seeing? Jeremy, I feel like I saw you take your mute off, like you had a thing to jump into. So I
Yeah,
want to
my
do that again.
filter went on. I stopped. But thank you for acknowledging me.
The interesting piece for me about the automatic or the automated decision making is that has already existed. This is a pre-AI phenomenon. Are you over 18? No. Well, then you're out. Are you within 30 miles of my location? No. Or you're out. There are many reasons that these systems make automated decisions that are are not AI dependent. They are simply rules-based decisioning. Right? It's actually a lot of the reason why many people get rejected is due to their aggressive approach to applying for jobs, because we don't respond. So they have responded in kind by applying to more jobs, and we reject. I do think that it's going to become a really interesting challenge as we see this increase in AI bot applies, right? We've found a whole nest of them recently that are getting into the market, and they are actually qualified. But also maybe they're not, because we don't know who wrote that resume.
Do the laws talk about screening versus actually, hiring them at all, or is there a differentiation there?
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Yeah, I was going to say, so this is the point that I was making earlier. There is automated decision making and automated decision execution. And they're both made very, very clear in the law in terms of the different responsibilities you have on them. So automated decision making, absolutely automatically rejecting a candidate when an algorithm makes a decision about a person without a human involvement. That's the key bit. So that's automated decision making. Automated decision execution is when an algorithm, an AI system, an automation, whatever you want to call it, assists or influences that human decision. So again, I see this as the difference between screening and scoring, ultimately, or scoring and ranking, or whatever you want to call it. But when you are giving a recruiter information, it's a score, it's a rank, it's a recommendation, but a person has to approve that final decision. That's slightly different when it comes into the law.
I would say, I think one of the important things here is moving up until like the LLM phase. We did have these black box machine learning algorithms where you couldn't, if people asked me when I was with a prior company how we came up with our rankings, I couldn't click a button and show them, right? But everything that we're using today if it's built on modern technology and designed well, we should be able, any vendor you're evaluating should be able to show you exactly why people have the score they have. And you should be able to evaluate it and know if you can stand behind it. And if it's done well, there are solutions on the market now that are a lot safer than 30 humans using their brains, right? And so it's about educating buyers, and buyers really it should be simple for a founder or a salesperson to click a button and show you the why behind everything that they're doing. And I think that didn't exist until recently, and it doesn't exist in every tool. So when you hear just because something demos well, it's everything under the hood is most important at this point.
Yeah.
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 Couldn't agree more.
So proof is better than demo. Absolutely. And I would kind of agree and disagree with you at the same time on that one, Jeremy. So firstly, pre kind of LLM, we had supervised versus unsupervised machine learning. We did have litigation happen with at least one HR tech vendor around black box decision making. HireView absolutely went through a massive piece of litigation around that. But actually, I would disagree to your point. I think if a piece of technology is using a large language model for screening, then they absolutely and utterly cannot explain with 100% guarantee what is happening there. Because large language models, by their very infrastructure and nature, are not repeatable, they're not explainable, they're not transparent. And so that's a challenge we have right now. So that's one of the biggest pieces of governance challenges that we have, is a lot of new vendors are coming out building discriminative solutions on generative AI, and it's square peg round hole situation. So I would actually argue against that. I think actually some of the kind of machine learning based platforms that we have had out there for some time, they're actually more transparent and more explainable than some of the more modern large language model ones.
And I think
Well, and I think that's putting
ahead.
an entire interview transcript into one LLM and scoring the whole thing is hugely, you'll get a different answer every time from the same LLM and the same transcript, right? So comes down to how you break the whole thing down. But no, you're absolutely right on that point. But there are a lot of different ways to get more accurate. So
I think it's also very important from a vendor perspective is that you develop a model card for every one of your model systems that you're deploying out to your customers. Primarily, it is the transparency that explains the details of what's happening, what's being tested, what compliance regulations are in scope, et cetera. So a model card is a great tool to have. So you don't have to, so salespeople don't have to go and explain it over and over and over and over again. Say, hey, here's what our AI model is intended to do. Here's its overview and such. At the end of the day, I think there's also this interesting notion. I think the difference between what we see in technology of yesteryears, like a CRM, and what we see today out of a lot of these modern AI tools, is that CRM, like if I wanted to move a candidate from one status to another, it's pretty straightforward. But in the context of the question you have to ask yourself as buyers is like, what's the intention of the AI, how it was initially designed to perform. So once you can understand what is the AI performing as designed versus, because then if it is, then you obviously this is where I feel like not having some sort of testing arena to see how the AI really functions, to see if it will work in your circumstances, is one of the harder challenges, knowing that it's not easy to put an AI system in a piloted environment. There's a lot that goes on, a lot of costs that goes on, et cetera. But I think we all need to figure that part of it out. But the alternative is like, hey, at least document the explainability of what your AI system is intended to do.
Yeah, and model cards super important. It's actually a requirement under Annex 4 documentation of the EU AI Act. So absolutely should be requesting that. Yeah.
We're running out of
I had a quick question on the automated decision making versus not automated decision making. So if you do scoring, but and the net result of the scoring is that the people in the bottom half of your score spectrum never get looked at, is that considered automated decision making because they're effectively excluded from consideration?
So it wasn't automated versus non-automated. It was automated decision making versus automated decision execution. So the difference being is that a human gets a list and they then make a decision on what they want to do next. So to answer your question, if you get a list of 100 people, and you're given a score to say these are the top 10%, et cetera, et cetera. It's up to you as a human to make a decision as to why you've decided not to go that, and that's the bit that you have to stand by as a human. So the machine isn't making a decision on your behalf. It's not saying
Well, the human has to reject those 50 below.
Exactly.
That. Okay.
Yeah,
The human should always be evaluating to make sure that those that are in red should be in red, and that's the
yeah, and this is the point that
That's super Pollyanna of everybody.
yeah, this is the point you made, Alex, on the chat around doing the QA. You should absolutely be regularly checking in on what comes out at the other end, whether that be ranking, scoring, whether that be bias, anything.
I see a new job in TA's future, the rejection specialist.
I mean, that's what Dave.
That's an old job, actually.
The current job, actually.
I mean, that's what Dayforce regularly does an AI review, and part of their process obviously is looking at all of the usages of their AI systems. Initially from a manual perspective, they were able to do maybe 17 AI reviews annually. Obviously, when they started to automate some of the aspects of governance, then they were able to creep that up into 100 something plus AI reviews. But an AI review is an essential part of governance as well. It's a way to do the checks and balances of the system and such, and to raise questions as to why decisions are being made like this. But again, it's a governance practice that gets instituted over time as you start to build the maturity of it.
As we wrap up, final thoughts. Martin, I'll start with you. What's your sort of one big thing for everyone to walk away as they think about this topic?
Don't think of governance as bureaucracy. Ultimately, think of it as an enabler. Think of it as absolutely as a differentiator as well nowadays. So don't let people be scared of governance. It's a positive.
Bennett.
Yeah, I think this is a great opportunity especially for HR TA leaders to really lean in on an aspect of AI that's really influential in the outcomes and the adoption. Start learning about governance. There is a number of career paths that are being kind of spawned out of the whole governance practice. That could be very interesting for a lot of folks that are looking for additional areas to transition into or get more actively involved. But governance, make sure that HR and TA ask about who's managing governance in your organization, because it is critical that because HR and TA, regardless of your systems, they're all considered high risk. So you are going to be at the center point of all regulations.
Yeah.
Make sure you have your governance buddy.
Yeah. Go find a governance buddy.
Go find a governance buddy. Thank you, everybody. It's time. We are going to skip November. I apologize. We're traveling. The world is crazy. Anyway, it's going to be in Barcelona. We'll see you at Workday Rising. Otherwise, join us in December. We are going to do a wrap up for the year. We have, following that, a really interesting roundtable on building an early careers program, especially in the age of AI and changing dynamics of early careers. So I'm super excited about that. That's going to be coming in January. So please join us for those. Thank you, guys. Thank you, Martin. Thank you, Bennett. I appreciate both of you and your time. Thank you, everyone else. Have a fabulous Wednesday.
Pleasure. Thank you all.
Thank you, everyone. We'll get the replay out next day or so.